Welcome to the PAFnow RPA Edition demo. Over the course of this video, I will give an overview and explain the highlights of this RPA edition. First, let me briefly introduce you to the process you see here to give a little bit more context. The data you see is drawn from a purchase-to-pay process. Typically, this begins with the creation of a purchase order, then proceeds to several approval levels, then the goods are received, then a few days later, the invoice is posted, and then, in the end, the invoice is paid for the purchase order. So there you have the process we'll be analyzing, but PAFnow is very useful in all the different phases of an RPA project. First, you can use PAFnow before a bot for the RPA is actually installed by identifying areas that could use the automation. Second, you can use PAFnow after a bot is installed to monitor its efficiency. Third, you can use PAFnow while the process actually runs. We'll cover that later. But for now, imagine we are in the phase where we want to figure out the RPA potential of our process. In this scenario, we have several ways to start. However, in our experience with our clients and partners, including the Big Four consulting companies, typically we begin by looking at the most frequent variants of our process for consideration in what should be automated. So how do we identify those most frequent variants? It's actually super simple in PAFnow. You can just use the variant filter on the right side of the page to find those top variants. I'll click number 1, which is the variant the process most frequently follows, and then the page will filter accordingly so that the Process Explorer displays that most frequent process variant. And now you can see what it looks like. You can also select multiple variants in the variant filter. I'll select the top 3. Additionally, you may have noticed when I selected the top variants, the tree map on the bottom right changed as well. Right now, it shows that these cases of our process are happy. Let me deselect these variants, and now you can see that we have several attributes related to our happy path, which is a standard attribute of PAFnow. So now, by clicking happy, we'll see all variants that belong to the happy path, and this is the second way of finding potential variants for automation. Let's take a look at these happy path variants. Notice they are similar to that most frequent variant that we looked at earlier, where a PO is created, followed by approvals, and then invoice steps. Now notice that there is another variant with a detour over a set payment block and remove payment block. This happens when the invoice volume is too high to be immediately paid. This set payment block can be automatic or set by human, and then it has to be removed before the payment is actually executed. Another variant we can see is due to mistakes where the goods receipt was posted and then a negative good receipt was posted and caused a loop in the process. This is probably something we don't want to automate, so let's exclude this from consideration. Now we are seeing our filtered variants that have potential for automation. This was the second way to find variants for automation after considering the most frequent. A third way to find variants for potential automation is a more theory-driven approach, and so far it has been more data-driven. I could use this button in the bottom right to delete all filters, but I will just delete the filter that I just applied on the Process Explorer using the trash bin icon in the top left of the Process Explorer. To begin the theory-driven analysis of our process, I'll click this button on the top right of the Process Explorer, which enables conformance checking. Next, I will click this triangular button to directly jump to our reference model. So, in the Process Explorer right now is the reference model that we prepared before the video. As you can see, this 2B model shows us it's fine if our process starts with either a purchase requisition or purchase order. Then there should be 3 levels of approval, but when the invoice volume is low, you can skip over the approval. The final stretch of the model indicates that there should be then a goods receipt, invoice posted, and then the final payment block should occur when the invoice volume is high, and then the invoice is paid. Now let's jump back to the actual process. I can easily see that in the most frequent path I have visualized here the purchase order through post-goods receipt is executed correctly, as well as post-invoice. However, our payment block has been skipped, which is why it is highlighted in yellow and the other edge in red. The yellow nodes and edges are the parts of the process that have been skipped but are in our reference model from earlier. The red edges and nodes indicate where the process went on the wrong path. Now I can use the Process Explorer to filter only for the variants that completely conform. Now we can see all the cases and variants that run as we defined in our reference model. For this data, that is 7 cases and 4 variants. We can also do the opposite of that and filter only on non-conformed cases. So now we can see that many of the variants that do not conform with our reference model. The conformed cases showed before do not necessarily indicate the highest potential for automation despite being good candidates for some automation. Instead, we can look at the non-conforming variants here and use those to see where our most common mistakes are and try to automate those pieces so that we can get closer to a standard conforming model with fewer mistakes. Another way to identify where we want some conformance and automation in our process is by looking at our open cases. To do that, I will go down a level in the hierarchy of our tree map. Now we can see the open and closed cases, with 108 being open and the rest being closed. The open cases can show us where a human action might be required to close that case now, or if any of the pieces of the case are viable for automation. We can also go further down in the hierarchy in the tree map and look at overdue cases to see where automation may benefit the time it takes for our process to occur. An overdue case is when a business fails to pay their invoice in the agreed upon payment period, which is something we definitely do not want. Now we can see that in the most common variants of our overdue cases, we didn't execute our payment block. What I do not get to see in this view of our process is whether or not any of these steps are already automatic or not. I know for a fact that in this dataset there are automated activities, but I don't know how that automation has affected my cases. So let's do a drill through. A drill through will take all of our filters that we are currently using, so our open cases and overdue cases, and carry them over to another page of our choosing. So I will go down to the bottom right to our drill through button, right click, and use the options pane that opens to navigate to our automation page. As you can see, there are many pages that you can drill through to, but we will focus on the automation page for this. Here we can see that the average automation rate is quite low at 2.33%, meaning there is quite a lot of room for improvement. In the lower bar chart, we see the distribution of the steps in our process by the average automation rate that the steps in our open cases have. And we can see that the only activity that is even partly automated is the posting of an invoice at 26%, which means that 74% of the time it is manually executed. This shows that there is a high rate of human touch in not only the post-invoice step, but our whole process. You can also see this in the Process Explorer because there is only one green node, which is our post-invoice step, and this is highlighted green because it is the highest rate of automation. Also notice that some of these cases stopped at set payment block, meaning that the payment has not been processed yet. What we don't see is whether or not in the rest of my cases, the removal of the payment block is ever automated. I'm going to reset the filters on the page using the Reset Filters button on the bottom right to view the automation rate of our whole dataset. What we can see now is that there are a couple green nodes and the automation rate is a little bit higher in the whole dataset. But at 4.08%, there's still a lot of room for improvement with automation. Let's take a look again at the bar chart. This shows automation rate by step, and we can see now that remove payment block is actually automated about 45% of the time on average. This is followed by post invoice, set payment block, and create purchase requisition. Now notice that triggering the actual payment of the invoice was hardly ever automated. It was automated only about 0.69% of the time. And as before, most of the steps in our processes are still not automated very much or even at all. So if we were to automate remove payment block, we could then probably automate pay invoice as well, because we know removing that block means that it can be paid. This would probably reduce the process's lead time and decrease the number of overdue payments. Instead of just assuming this, let's simulate what happens if we were to do this simulation. To do this, we add a simulation feature that is triggered with the button on the bottom of the page. So now you can see the whole page changes to our simulation view. Now let's imagine that we simulate pay invoice and the removal of the payment block like we said we would. Right now, our actual lead time is almost 30 days on average for our process. The simulated lead time reflects that as well, but the simulated lead time will change. I'm going to use this simulated automation rate slider to visualize what would happen if I fully automated these steps. Notice in the lower bar chart that our simulated duration for these two steps drops drastically. We can also see that my actual lead time is the same, but my simulated lead time shows that we would save about 11 days on average in our process lead time if we were to automate our steps like this. This would probably drastically decrease the rate of overdue payments. So now we've taken a look at the automation rate of our process, but this is not where we will stop with PAFnow. We can actually take this one step further and trigger the removal of the payment block and then pay the invoice. To do that, we will head over to the action plan page. Alright, so now we are on our action plan page where we can trigger some action to go along with our analysis. The purpose of this page is to find cases that have the highest urgency to be completed. To accomplish this, we turn the process flow on its side and added a decomposition tree visual above it. This allows you to view the flow of your process left to right while observing different attributes of the cases in the above decomposition tree. Let's use this tree to split the hierarchy of our invoice volume so that we can see how the invoice volume is distributed by overdue status. We can see that we have a volume of 0.3 million euro in our overdue category and 2.33 million in our not overdue category. Now, we will add in the next level of our hierarchy using the vendor name, and then I see again how the invoice volume is distributed over that category. First, let's look at the cases that vendor 17 has. When I click on these cases, we can see that we are up to the step of posting our goods received, but no farther, and case 52 is still in approvals. These cases don't seem to show any real opportunity for automation, so let's look at vendor 20's cases. As we click on these, notice we are in the process of paying our invoice and have a payment block set. Let's use one of these cases to see how we can implement our automation. As you can see, this process flow looks familiar. We begin with a purchase order creation, then skip our approval, post our goods receipt, post invoice, and then we come to our set payment block, which is not ideal because we have not paid our invoices yet. Let's jump over to the visual on the right that has our purchase order ID and a button saying Run Bot. I'll select the purchase order I'm interested in first, then I'll type in an email for a person who possibly has some amount of administration over this process. In this case, I will just use myself. Finally, I will click Run Bot to trigger this visual. So what did this visual just do? This visual is a Power Apps visual that allows us to connect to other Microsoft Power Apps including Dynamics, Power BI, etc., and then interact with those apps. The bot that we have set up will take the purchase order that you selected, find it, and then send you an email. That email will ask for permission so that the bot can then remove the payment block and pay the invoice. Let's take a look at the email and what authorization would look like. So here we have the email that we received from the bot that we are using to finish our purchasing process when we have a payment block set. As you can see in the title, we have the vendor and the purchase order ID that we selected previously. It also shows the resource that requested this action take place. In this case, it is my email. In the content of the email, we have the purchase order ID again, the material group, document type, invoice volume, possibility of discount, in this case no possibility, and a payment term if that data is available. Now I will scroll to the bottom and find an approve and a reject button. I'll click approve and then submit this approval so that the bot will run. And now I will receive notification that my approval was successful. We are back on the action plan page where we told our bot to run. The first thing to notice here is that our data is refreshed and we no longer see case ID 813, which is the one we chose to automate. This can indicate that we successfully ran our bot and completed our purchasing because it is no longer overdue. To confirm this, let's head over to the benchmarking page and use one of our attribute filters to find case 813. Our Process Explorer will filter, and now we can see that the case has been completed. We have our payment block, then the removal, and finally we have paid our invoice. This indicates that our bot was successful. With that, we will conclude the RPA Edition demo. Thank you for viewing, and I hope you enjoyed seeing how automation can be included in process mining in Power BI.